Standing at 6 feet 2 inches and weighing between 230 to 240 pounds throughout his career, John Riggins was one of the heaviest running backs to ever dominate the NFL. And let me be clear, in an era where running backs were supposed to be quick, elusive, and light on their feet, Riggins was the complete opposite. While most backs in the 70s and 80s weighed around 200 to 210 pounds and relied on speed, the Diesel bulldozed through defenses with pure punishing power, running over linebackers like they were practice dummies, dragging multiple defenders into the end zone, and delivering bone-crushing hits that made grown men think twice about tackling him. Riggins turned his weight into a weapon that changed the game. He didn't run around you. He ran through you, and if you tried to stop him, you were the one ending up on your back. However, John Riggins' story is way more complex than your typical NFL legend. The truth is, people questioned whether he was too big to be great from day one. Scouts looked at his frame and worried he'd be too slow. Coaches wondered if that extra weight would destroy his knees before he turned 30. The NFL had never really seen a back built like Riggins dominate for long, and most people figured his body would break down fast. And for a while, it looked like they might be right. Riggins battled injuries, sat out an entire season over contract disputes, and people wrote him off as done. The critics said he was too heavy to last, too old to keep producing, too stubborn to adapt. But here's the thing. At age 34, when most running backs are retired or riding the bench, Riggins had the best season of his career, rushing for a then NFL record 24 touchdowns. At 35, he led the league in rushing touchdowns again. The same weight everyone said would end his career became the reason he outlasted everyone else. This is a story about refusing to change who you are, proving that power beats speed when it matters most, and showing the world that being different doesn't mean being wrong. It's the story of John Riggins, the Diesel, the running back who was too big, too slow, and too old to be great until he became one of the greatest to ever do it. Before we dive into this story, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These videos take countless hours of research, digging through old game footage, reading through decades of interviews, and piecing together the real story that most people never hear. Your support means everything and helps us bring you more stories like this one. Now let's get into how a kid from small-town Kansas became a Super Bowl MVP and a Hall of Famer by doing things his own way. John Riggins was born on August 4th, 1949, in Seneca, Kansas. But to really understand how this kid became one of the most feared running backs in NFL history, we need to go back to where it all started, a tiny farming town called Centralia, population 512. Growing up in Centralia, Kansas in the 1950s, John's life was about as far from the NFL spotlight as you could get. His father, Franklin Eugene Riggins, everyone called him Frank or Gene, worked as a depot agent for the railroad, a steady but demanding job that barely covered the bills for a family of 5. His mother, Mildred, held down the household, raising John and his 2 brothers, Frank Jr. and Bill. The Riggins family lived in a modest house in a community where everybody knew everybody, and your reputation meant everything. Frank Sr. was old school strict, the kind of father who told his boys straight up, "Don't do anything that brings shame to the Riggins name." That kind of pressure sticks with you, and for John, it shaped how he approached everything in life with a fierce determination not to let his family down. But here's the thing about young John Riggins. He wasn't supposed to be a football player, at least not in his mind. While other kids were obsessed with sports, John was down at the creek catching bullheads and snakes. He dreamed about exploring the sequoia forest in California or the canyons of Arizona. Now, he idolized Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, mountain men who lived free and wild. Football, that was just something his strict father expected him to do. And John, being the kind of kid who didn't want to disappoint his old man, went along with it. But make no mistake, in those early years, his heart wasn't in it. Now, even as a kid, John Riggins wasn't your average size. By the time he got to high school, he was 6 feet 2 inches and around 210 pounds. That's massive for a teenager in the 1960s. Most running backs back then were under 200 pounds, quick and shifty. But Riggins, he was built more like a fullback or a linebacker, and that size came with expectations. Coaches saw this big, powerful kid and immediately thought, this kid's got to play football. So John strapped on the pads not because he loved the game, but because that's what big kids in small Kansas towns did. And here's where it gets interesting. Despite his size, John Riggins was fast, like really fast. Not just fast for a big guy, flat out fast. He won the Kansas State Championship in the 100-yard dash as a junior. Then he won it again as a senior. Two-time state champion sprinter at 210 pounds. That's not normal. That combination of size and speed is what scouts dream about, and it's exactly what made him special. When John hit you, you stayed down. When he broke into the open field, good luck catching him. Coaches at Centralia High School started to realize they had something different on their hands. In his senior year, Riggins rushed for 1,456 yards in just 9 games, averaging 13.2 yards per carry. Let that sink in, 13.2 yards every time he touched the ball. At Chan, he also averaged 61 yards per punt return. 61 yards, that's video game numbers. He led the Panthers to a 9-0 season and a state championship in 1966. And suddenly, this kid who never really loved football was getting attention from colleges all over the country, but not everyone was sold. See, even with all that success, there were doubters. Some coaches looked at Riggins and saw a kid who was too big to play running back at the next level. You're built like a fullback, they'd tell him. Maybe you should play on the offensive line. That's code for you're too heavy, too slow, not the right body type for a skill position. And for a kid who was already questioning whether football was even his path, those words stung. Riggins wanted to carry the ball. He didn't want to block. He didn't want to play in the trenches. But the message was clear. If you're this size, you better be willing to change positions or you might not have a future in this game. And that doubt, that's where the chip on his shoulder started, because John Riggins spent his entire career proving people wrong about what a running back was supposed to look like. Riggins went to Centralia High School in Centralia, Kansas, a tiny Class B school in a town where everybody knew your name, and Friday Night Football was the only show in town. This wasn't some powerhouse program churning out Division I athletes every year. Centralia was small-town Kansas football where resources were limited, expectations were high, and if you were big and talented, you carried the weight of the entire community on your shoulders. By his freshman year, Riggins was already around 210 pounds. By his senior year, he'd bulked up to 220 pounds of pure, hard-hitting power. And here's where things get interesting, because while Riggins was dominating on the football field, he was also excelling everywhere else. He was an excellent math student. He played in the school band and orchestra. He earned all-state honors in basketball. And remember those state championship sprint titles? He won those as a junior and senior while carrying 220 pounds on his frame. This wasn't just some big, slow fullback. This was a freak athlete who could do it all. But here's what nobody talks about: the internal battle Riggins faced every single season. Yeah, he was bigger than most running backs, and yeah, there were whispers. Coaches would pull him aside and say things like, "John, you're carrying a lot of weight for a ball carrier. You need to slim down if you want to play at the next level." And Riggins would try. He'd run extra laps after practice. He'd skip meals. He'd do everything coaches asked, but the weight, it barely budged, because that's just how his body was built. He wasn't fat. He was solid, powerful, built like a tank. But in an era where running backs were supposed to be 190 pounds and shifty, Riggins was an anomaly that made people uncomfortable. But when Friday night came, none of that mattered. In his senior year alone, Riggins rushed for 1,456 yards in just 9 games, averaging an absurd 13.2 yards every time he touched the ball. 13.2, that's not a typo. Every single carry, on average, moved the chains, and he wasn't just a runner. He averaged 61 yards per punt return, 61 yards. Defenders would see him coming back and just pray they could slow him down. Most of the time, they couldn't. Riggins led the Centralia Panthers to a perfect 9-0 season and a state championship in 1966. He was unstoppable. There's one game that perfectly captures what made Riggins special. The details of the opponent are lost to time, but the legend isn't. Riggins would take handoffs, lower his shoulder, and run straight through would-be tacklers like they weren't even there. One defender would hit him. Riggins kept going. 2 defenders, same result. There are stories of him carrying 3 guys on his back into the end zone, his legs still churning, refusing to go down. This wasn't finesse. This wasn't dancing around people. This was pure old-school smash-mouth football, and the people of Centralia loved every second of it. But when it came time for college recruiting, Riggins ran into a problem. He had the stats: 1,456 yards, a state championship, All-American honors in football, All-State in basketball, 2 state titles in track. On paper, he should have been the most recruited player in Kansas. But college coaches looked at that 220-pound frame and hesitated. Big-time programs like Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Missouri, schools that dominated the Big 8 conference, they all passed. They looked at Riggins and saw a kid who was too heavy to be a running back, too slow to keep up with faster defenses at the college level. He's a great high school player, they'd say, but we're not sure his body type translates. That's code for, we think he's too fat. One school was different. The University of Kansas, his home state school. Just a couple hours from Centralia, offered him a scholarship. Now, Kansas wasn't exactly a football powerhouse. They had a rich basketball tradition, sure, but football, not so much. Kansas had been to only 2 bowl games in their entire history by the time Riggins graduated high school. But they saw something in him, or maybe they just needed talent. Either way, they offered, and Riggins accepted. His older brother Frank was already there, which made the decision easier. It wasn't Alabama or Ohio State. It wasn't the dream school every kid fantasizes about, but it was a chance. And for a kid who'd been doubted his entire life because of his size, a chance was all he needed. Little did anyone know John Riggins was about to make Kansas football history. When Riggins arrived at the University of Kansas in 1967, he was 18 years old. He weighed around 230 pounds and had something to prove. This wasn't Ohio State or Alabama. This was Kansas, a basketball school with a football program that had been to 2 bowl games in its entire history. But Riggins didn't care about that. He was there to play with his brother Frank, and more importantly, to show everyone who doubted him that a 230-pound running back could dominate at the college level. But here's the thing nobody expected. Riggins' freshman year was completely wasted. Back in those days, NCAA rules didn't allow freshmen to play varsity football. You had to sit out a year, practice with the team, and basically serve as a glorified scout team player while you watched from the sidelines. So Riggins spent his entire first year at Kansas doing nothing but waiting, watching his brother Frank play, and wondering if he'd ever get his shot. Then came 1968, his sophomore season. A new coach, Pepper Rogers, came in and saw what Riggins could do. But there was a catch. Riggins wasn't the guy. His older brother Frank was still in the backfield, and John spent most of his time lead blocking for him. Think about that. A kid who rushed for 1,456 yards and won a state championship in high school was now clearing the way for someone else. It had to be frustrating, but Riggins didn't complain. He put his head down, did his job, and when he got his chances, he made them count. He rushed for 866 yards and 6 touchdowns that season, helping Kansas go 9-1 in the regular season and win the Big 8 Conference Championship. For the first time in over 20 years, Kansas was going to a major bowl game, the Orange Bowl against Penn State. And that's when everything fell apart. In one of the most heartbreaking losses in college football history, Kansas lost 15-14 after Penn State converted a 2-point conversion on a play that should never have happened. Because Kansas had 12 men on the field, the penalty gave Penn State another chance, and they scored. Game over. It was devastating. And for Riggins, it was his last game playing alongside his brother. Frank graduated, leaving John as the clear number 1 back heading into 1969. But instead of breaking out, Riggins and Kansas collapsed. The team went 1-9, 1 win, 9 losses. Riggins rushed for only 662 yards and scored just 1 touchdown the entire season. 1. After scoring 6 the year before, it was a disaster. The losses piled up, the offense couldn't move the ball. And Riggins, who was supposed to be the answer, looked ordinary for the first time in his life. And that's when the pressure really started to build. Because if Riggins couldn't dominate at Kansas, how was he ever going to make it in the NFL? Heading into his senior year in 1970, Riggins knew this was it, his last chance to prove he belonged. The team had gone 1-9 the year before. He'd scored 1 touchdown in the entire season. 1. NFL scouts weren't exactly flooding Lawrence, Kansas, to watch him play. And with Kansas coming off the worst season in recent memory, nobody expected much from the Jayhawks or their 230-pound running back. But Riggins came back different, hungrier, more determined, and from the very first game, he announced to the entire Big 8 conference that he was done being doubted. He took handoffs and exploded through holes like a man possessed. When defenders tried to tackle him, he ran right through them. First guy bounced off. Second guy couldn't bring him down. Third guy ended up on his back. Riggins was on a mission, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop him. By the time the season ended, Riggins had carried the ball 209 times for 1,131 yards and a then-school record 14 touchdowns. 14, after scoring 1 the entire previous season. He led the entire Big 8 conference in both carries and rushing yards. And here's the kicker. He broke Gale Sayers' career rushing record at Kansas, finishing with 2,659 total yards. Gale Sayers, the Hall of Famer, the legend. Riggins had just passed him. Kansas still only went 5-6 that season. The team wasn't good, but Riggins, he was unanimous All-American. And he was all Big 8 first team. And suddenly, NFL scouts who had written him off as too heavy, too slow, too risky, they all came running back. Because what Riggins proved in 1970 was simple. It doesn't matter what you look like if you can flat out dominate. After that senior season, the New York Jets made Riggins the 6th overall pick in the 1971 NFL Draft, the first running back selected. The same scouts who said he'd never make it, they just watched him become a first-round pick. And the doubters who said a 230-pound back couldn't succeed, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Over his 3 years at Kansas, Riggins put up numbers that put him in the conversation with the best running backs in the country. He finished with 2,659 career rushing yards and 21 combined touchdowns. But more than the stats, and it was how he got those yards that made NFL scouts take notice. Riggins didn't dance. He didn't juke. He didn't try to make defenders miss. He ran straight ahead, lowered his shoulder, and dared you to stop him. His style was old school, smash-mouth football. Hit the hole hard, break the first tackle, drag the second guy for 5 more yards, and leave defenders wondering what just hit them. In that senior season alone, his 1,131 yards and 14 touchdowns weren't just good. They were historically good for Kansas. He was carrying the ball 209 times, taking a beating every single week, and somehow getting stronger as the season went on. That's what separated Riggins from everyone else. Most backs would wear down. Riggins wore defenses down. By the fourth quarter, when defenders were tired and hurt, Riggins was just getting started. But here's the thing. Even while putting up those numbers, even while breaking Gale Sayers' record, even while being a unanimous All-American, the whispers never stopped. NFL scouts looked at his tape and saw a dominant runner. Then they looked at his measurables and saw 230 pounds on a 6'2" frame, and the concerns came flooding back. Can his knees hold up carrying that much weight over an NFL season? Will his body break down after taking 300-plus carries a year? Is he too slow for NFL defenses? One anonymous scout reportedly said, he's a great college back, but his body won't survive the NFL. Another called him a liability because of his size. And the crazy part? Riggins heard it all. After spending his entire life proving doubters wrong, after dominating at every level, he was right back where he started, being told he was too big to make it. On draft day in 1971, Riggins didn't have to wait long. The New York Jets, desperate for a running game after years of mediocrity, took him with the 6th overall pick in the first round. He was the first running back selected that year. The Jets looked at his tape, saw a bulldozer in human form, and decided to bet on him. And just like that, John Riggins was headed to the NFL, ready to prove once again that being different doesn't mean being wrong. When John Riggins showed up to New York Jets training camp in 1971, he was 21 years old, weighed 230 pounds, and was the 6th overall pick in the draft. The Jets had just suffered through years of mediocrity after their Super Bowl III win, and they were desperate for a spark. But Riggins wasn't walking into a friendly situation. The coaching staff looked at his frame and immediately had questions, not about his talent, they'd seen the tape, but about whether that 230-pound body could hold up over a 14-game NFL season. Here's what nobody expected. Riggins didn't just survive his rookie year, he dominated it. The Jets made him their starter from day one, all 14 games. And Riggins responded by becoming the first player in franchise history to lead the team in both rushing and receiving in the same season. He carried the ball 180 times for 769 yards and caught 36 passes for 231 more yards. Not spectacular numbers by Hall of Fame standards, but for a rookie on a bad team, that was impressive. He'd proven he could handle the workload. He'd proven his body could take the punishment. But here's the twist. The doubts didn't go away. After that rookie season, people still questioned him. Sure, he put up decent numbers, but he's already dealing with wear and tear. How long can a 230-pound back really last in this league? The same concerns that followed him in high school, that followed him in college, were still there. And in year 2, those concerns seemed justified when Riggins had to have knee surgery and missed the final 2 games of the 1972 season. He'd rushed for 944 yards in just 12 games, 4 yards short of the franchise record. But all anyone could talk about was the injury. See, his knees can't handle the weight. It's only a matter of time before his body breaks down completely. Riggins heard it all, and for the first time in his career, he started to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe his body wasn't built to last. Maybe all those people who said he was too heavy, too slow, too risky, maybe they knew something he didn't. But quitting, that wasn't in John Riggins' DNA. He'd spent his entire life proving doubters wrong, and he wasn't about to stop now. Here's what makes John Riggins different from almost every other running back who ever played the game. He didn't try to change. He didn't hire a special trainer. He didn't go on some crazy diet. He didn't spend the offseason trying to slim down to make the doubters happy. Instead, Riggins did something that nobody expected. He doubled down on who he was. He kept his weight at 230 pounds. He kept running the same way, and he dared anyone to prove he couldn't make it work. The results? In 1973 and 1974, Riggins battled shoulder injuries and missed 11 games combined. His stats dropped, only 1,162 total yards and 11 touchdowns over those 2 seasons. The doubters came back louder than ever. See, his body's breaking down. Too much weight, too much contact. He won't last. But Riggins didn't panic. He didn't change his approach. He just kept grinding. Then came 1975. Riggins stayed healthy for the first time in years, started every single game, and rushed for 1,005 yards and 8 touchdowns. He became the first running back in New York Jets history to ever rush for over 1,000 yards in a season. Think about that. The Jets had been around since 1960, and no running back had ever hit 1,000 yards, until John Riggins did it at 230 pounds. He was named team MVP for the second time in his career, and earned his first and only Pro Bowl selection. But even after proving everyone wrong again, Riggins knew something had to change. Not his body, not his weight, not his style. He needed a new team. The Jets were Joe Namath's team, and despite Namath's declining production, they were still a pass-first offense. Riggins wanted to run the ball. He wanted a team that would let him be the workhorse. So when his contract was up after the 1975 season, Riggins walked. The Washington Redskins offered him a 5-year, $1.5 million contract, compared to the $63,000 he was making with the Jets. It was a no-brainer. The biggest question heading into Washington wasn't whether Riggins could play. It was whether his 230-pound frame could survive long enough to prove he was worth the money. In 1978, John Riggins' 3rd season with the Washington Redskins, everything clicked. He was 28 years old, coming off a knee injury that had wiped out most of 1977, and people were starting to wonder if his best days were behind him. The Redskins had a new coach, Jack Pardee, and a new offensive philosophy, and for the first time since arriving in Washington, Riggins was going to be the featured back, and he made the most of it. Riggins carried the ball 248 times for 1,014 yards and 5 touchdowns. After missing almost an entire season after dealing with injuries and doubts and people saying his body was breaking down, Riggins came back and rushed for over 1,000 yards. The performance was so impressive that he was named the NFL's Comeback Player of the Year. At 28 years old, with a 230-pound frame that everyone said would destroy his knees, Riggins had just proven he wasn't going anywhere. But 1978 was just the beginning. In 1979, Riggins took it to another level. He rushed for a career-high 1,153 yards and 9 touchdowns while adding 28 receptions and 3 more scores through the air. That's 1,453 total yards from scrimmage at 230 pounds at 29 years old. In an era where running backs were supposed to be light, fast, and fragile, Riggins was heavy, powerful, and unstoppable. He was running over linebackers, dragging safeties, and wearing defenses down in the fourth quarter when everyone else was gassed. The doubters went quiet. The scouts who said he'd never last, silent. The coaches who told him to lose weight, watching from the sidelines as Riggins became one of the most productive backs in the NFL. Over those 2 seasons combined, Riggins rushed for 2,167 yards and 14 touchdowns. Yeah, he'd gone from injury question mark to one of the league's most reliable workhorses. But just when everything seemed to be going right, Riggins made a decision that would shock the entire NFL and put his career in serious jeopardy. After back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in 1978 and 1979, Riggins was finally the workhorse back the Redskins had paid for. He was 30 years old, healthy, productive, and entering what should have been the prime of his career. But in July 1980, during training camp, Riggins asked the Redskins to renegotiate his contract. He was making $300,000 per year. Good money, but not what he felt he was worth after proving everyone wrong. The Redskins refused, so Riggins did something nobody expected. He walked out of training camp, just left. The Redskins placed him on the left camp retired list, which meant he couldn't play for any other team in the NFL. He was essentially banned from football, and instead of backing down, instead of crawling back and apologizing, Riggins sat out the entire 1980 season, the whole year, gone. People couldn't believe it. At 30 years old, with running backs having notoriously short careers, Riggins was voluntarily walking away from the game. He's done, the critics said. Nobody sits out a full season at 30 and comes back. His body will never be the same. He'll lose his speed, his conditioning, his edge. Some people thought he'd never play another down in the NFL. But here's what made John Riggins different. He didn't care what anyone thought. He sat out 1980, spent the year hunting and relaxing in Kansas, and waited for the Redskins to realize they needed him more than he needed them. And in 1981, a new head coach named Joe Gibbs traveled all the way to Kansas to meet with Riggins. When Gibbs arrived, Riggins was out hunting. When he finally showed up in full camouflage, holding a beer at 10 in the morning, he looked Gibbs in the eye and said something the coach would never forget. "You need to get me back there. I'll make you famous." Gibbs thought Riggins was crazy, but he brought him back anyway, and what happened next changed NFL history. In 1983, at 34 years old, John Riggins had the best season of his career, and it wasn't even close. He carried the ball 375 times, the most in the NFL, for a career-high 1,347 yards, and a then NFL record 24 rushing touchdowns. 24. At 34 years old, weighing 240 pounds, in an era when running backs were supposed to be finished by 30, Riggins just set the league on fire. So he led the entire NFL in rushing touchdowns. He scored 144 total points that season, second in the league only to Washington's kicker, Mark Mosley. And here's the crazy part. It was the first time since 1951 that the top 2 scorers in the NFL played on the same team. Riggins also set an NFL record by scoring touchdowns in 13 consecutive games. 13 straight games where defenses knew he was getting the ball, knew he was coming, and still couldn't stop him. He wasn't running around people. He was running through them. Linebackers bounced off, safeties got trucked, cornerbacks got embarrassed, and Riggins just kept churning, kept pounding, kept scoring. For his performance, Riggins won the Burt Bell Award as NFL Player of the Year. He was named first-team All-Pro for the first and only time in his career at 34 years old. After sitting out an entire season, after a decade of people saying his body would break down, John Riggins was now the best running back in football. But here's what made 1983 even more remarkable. Riggins didn't just dominate in the regular season. He led the Redskins to a 14-2 record and another deep playoff run. And when the postseason arrived, Riggins put together another masterclass. He rushed for 242 yards and 5 touchdowns in just 2 playoff games, extending his NFL record to 6 consecutive postseason games with at least 100 rushing yards. The doubters, gone. The scouts who said he was too heavy, silent. The critics who said he'd never last, proven wrong in the most dominant way possible. John Riggins had just put together one of the greatest seasons by a running back in NFL history, and he did it at an age when most backs were already retired. After his record-breaking 1983 season, Riggins was on top of the world. He was 34 years old, the NFL Player of the Year, and had just proven that a 240-pound running back could not only survive, but dominate at an age when most backs were already retired. Everything was perfect. And then 1984 happened. Riggins showed up to training camp with a bad back. Not just sore, bad. The kind of bad that makes you wonder if your body is finally giving out. And for a 35-year-old running back who'd been absorbing hits for over a decade, it was exactly what the doubters had been waiting for. See, they said, we told you. His body can't hold up. Too much weight. Too many carries. And it was only a matter of time. But here's the thing about John Riggins. He didn't care what anyone thought. Despite the bad back, despite being 35 years old, Riggins carried the ball 327 times in 1984, over 300 carries for the second straight year. He rushed for 1,239 yards and tied for the league lead in rushing touchdowns with 14. On November 18th, 1984, at 35 years and 106 days old, Riggins became the oldest player in NFL history to rush for over 1,000 yards in a season, breaking John Henry Johnson's record. It's a record that still stands today. In 1985, Riggins' body finally started breaking down for real. He rushed for just 677 yards and 8 touchdowns in 12 games before George Rogers, the younger Heisman Trophy winner the Redskins had traded for, replaced him as the starter. At 36 years old, Riggins knew it was over. Not the Redskins released him after the season, and he retired. But by then, Riggins had already done what everyone said was impossible. He'd rushed for more yards in his 30s than he did in his 20s. He'd set age records that still stand decades later, and he'd proven once and for all that being different doesn't mean being wrong. After his dominant 1984 season at age 35, Riggins knew his body was finally starting to give out. The bad back wasn't getting better. The wear and tear from over 2,900 career carries was catching up. But in typical Riggins fashion, he held out during the 1985 training camp at 36 years old with a bad back and 2 bad hips, and negotiated the largest one-year contract in NFL history for a running back at the time, $825,000. He wasn't going out without getting paid what he was worth. In 1985, Riggins played 12 games and started 11, rushing for 677 yards and 8 touchdowns. The numbers weren't what they used to be, but he still managed to rush for over 100 yards in 3 of his last 4 starts. Late in the season, the Redskins made George Rogers, the younger Heisman Trophy winner, the starter. When the season ended, Washington released Riggins. At 36 years old, after 14 seasons in the NFL, John Riggins retired. His career numbers told an incredible story. 11,352 rushing yards, 104 rushing touchdowns, 250 receptions for 2,090 yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns. A total of 13,442 yards from scrimmage and 116 total touchdowns over 175 games. He rushed for over 1,000 yards 5 times and over 100 yards in 35 games, including a then-record 6 in the postseason. He played in 2 Super Bowls, won 1, and was named Super Bowl 17 MVP. But here's what made Riggins truly special. In 1992, John Riggins was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. In his speech, he reflected on a career that defied every prediction, every doubt, every criticism about his weight. He'd spent his entire life being told he was too big, I'm too heavy, too slow. And he'd spent his entire career proving those people wrong. What Riggins proved was simple. Your body type doesn't define your ability. Being different doesn't mean being wrong. Heart, determination, and refusing to quit matter more than fitting someone else's idea of what you should be. Riggins opened doors for power backs who didn't fit the mold. He showed that running through people could be just as effective as running around them. Among running backs over 230 pounds, Riggins stands alone. In Washington Redskins history, he remains one of the greatest players to ever wear the uniform. His 43-yard Super Bowl touchdown run is still voted by fans as the greatest moment in franchise history. The records he set for oldest running back to accomplish certain feats, most of them still stand today. Over 35 years after he retired, Joe Theismann, Riggins' teammate and Hall of Fame quarterback, said it best. John's work ethic was unmatched. He worked tirelessly on his craft and kept himself in great shape. When everyone said he couldn't do it, he went out and did it anyway. That's who John Riggins was. John Riggins spent his whole life being told he was too big to succeed, and he spent his whole career running over everyone who doubted him. From a small town in Kansas to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Riggins proved that the only person who gets to decide your story is you. Thanks for watching.